You know, sometimes a single sentence is all it takes to just ignite the internet. And today, we're diving into the anatomy of one of those firestorms, a massive online thread that just exploded in response to a statement from a sitting president. Now, it's worth pointing out, this particular thread was overwhelmingly critical. So what we're really analyzing here are the big themes from that specific online reaction. Let's get into it.
So this is it. This is the quote. The spark that lit the fuse on this corner of the internet. And wow, did it trigger a raw, immediate, and pretty wide-ranging discussion. We're going to break down exactly how that conversation played out, theme by theme, using the comments themselves.
Okay, so here's our game plan for breaking this whole thing down. First, we'll look at that initial blast of reaction. Then, we'll see how users almost instantly went back to their high school civics lessons. From there, we'll get into their analysis of the president himself, the bigger picture of the country's divisions, and finally, those really deep anxieties about what comes next.
All right, first up, that initial wave. When a statement like this drops, what's the very first thing people do online? They react, and they react in huge numbers.
And look, we're not talking about just a handful of comments. We are talking about thousands. In just a few hours, a single thread became this sprawling archive of public sentiment. And right away, some really clear and powerful themes started to emerge. The first big one, a collective trip back to government class.
What's so fascinating is where this conversation went right off the bat. The most dominant immediate reaction wasn't just, anger. It was this collective appeal to the basic principles of American government. It was almost like a national alarm bell for checks and balances just went off in everyone's head.
And just for a quick refresher, this is the textbook definition, right? It's the core idea that no single part of the government, not Congress, not the courts, and definitely not the president, is supposed to have absolute power. This one concept became the absolute bedrock of the entire discussion.
This comment here, from a user named Jester_, and one of the top voted ones, by the way, just perfectly captures that immediate, almost instinctual reaction. For so many people, this statement wasn't just a political misstep, it felt like a direct assault on the most basic civics lesson they'd ever learned.
And this is where it gets really interesting, because you see this huge gap open up. Users started contrasting the theory, what we all learn in school, with what they felt was the current reality. There was this profound sense of disillusionment, this feeling that the very system designed to prevent this exact thing was failing to do its job.
This quote from Psychic Dave really gets to the heart of that anxiety, the fear that the rules only matter if the people in charge actually agree to play by them. This revealed a crisis of faith, not just in a single statement, but in the whole system. And that, well, it naturally led the conversation from the system itself to the man behind the statement.
So yeah, the discussion just naturally evolved. After talking about the rules of the game, users turned their attention to the player who had just claimed he could do whatever he wanted. The analysis got very, very personal.
And the descriptions they used, they were incredibly blunt. Commenters came up with this flood of analogies to paint a picture of their perception. You saw things like a 6-year-old we made president, and a 4th grader's impression over and over again. It all suggested this view of immaturity and really a fundamental misunderstanding of the job itself.
But some of the comparisons were far more stark and frankly alarming. For example, one user responded to a comment about the president's character being unchanged since he was a kid by citing this quote from Joseph Goebbels. It just goes to show how high the stakes felt for some people in this thread, who were drawing parallels to some of the darkest chapters in history.
From analyzing one man, the whole thread just kind of zoomed out to try and diagnose the entire country. The conversation became the space for users to really lament what they saw as these deep, maybe even unbridgeable divides in the American psyche.
This user, not a St. Bernard, really summed up a key frustration. This idea that political tribalism was making people defend things from their guy that they would absolutely condemn from the other side. The fear was that loyalty to your team was starting to override loyalty to democratic principles themselves.
One user offered this anecdotal breakdown of the country, and it really resonated with a lot of people. It paints this picture of a nation stuck in a 3-way deadlock. You've got a third that's passionately opposed, a third that's passionately in support, and a final third that's just totally checked out, creating this kind of political paralysis.
And this pretty much sums up a point made over and over again by different users. The argument was that for a certain part of the population, the fight isn't about ideology or policy anymore. It's just about making sure their team, led by their king, gets total power over the other side.
All of this, as you can imagine, led to the final,
and maybe the most powerful theme of the entire discussion. After dissecting the statement, the system, the man, and the country, users were left with these profound, really anxious questions about what the future holds.
This quote from SFW just captures this deep, existential fear. It's the concern that the chaos of right now is normalizing behavior that used to be unthinkable, and that it's creating a whole new generation that has no memory of what a normal functioning democracy even looks like.
So the thread was just filled with these heavy questions. This was a central one. People were debating if the system was just strained or if it was, actually fundamentally broken beyond repair, with a Congress and a Supreme Court that seemed unable or maybe unwilling to act as a check.
And okay, beyond the actual laws, what about the unwritten rules, the norms of how politicians are supposed to act? The fear here was that even if the institutions somehow survive, the culture of restraint and respect for the process might just be gone for good.
This really blunt take from user Thaddeus JP reflects this deep cynicism that kind of ran through the end of the thread. It's this unsettling idea that maybe a lot of people are just too comfortable in their daily lives to make the sacrifices needed to confront a real threat to their democracy.
And this is really the final, haunting question that this whole online firestorm leaves us with. The people on this thread were obviously outraged, but their biggest fear, it seemed, was that they were in the minority. What does it really say about the health of a democracy when a leader can claim the right to do anything they want, and it isn't universally seen as a deal breaker? That's the question that just kind of lingered long after the last comment was posted.